Welcome to the Shorten Anime channel. Today we'll dive into the latest episode of The Great Ruler. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to support the channel. The Great Ruler, Season 1, Episode 38. Within this vast region of the Northern Spiritual Realm, it was hard for the variety of large and small commonplace events to attract the interest of others. However, there was one event that was considered to be a rare and grand event within the Northern Spiritual Realm. That was the Northern Spiritual Academy's entry competition. During this competition, they would decide the home for the entry into the 5 great academies. Within the eyes of all the forces in the Northern Spiritual Realm, the 5 great academies were basically an incomprehensible and massive existence. They could not imagine what sort of background and terrifying power it possesses. The only thing that they did know was that they couldn't even be considered as ants in the eyes of the 5 great academies. This is why almost everybody would attempt to let their child enter this massive existence. They were clear that their achievements would far surpass any ordinary person if they managed to enter the 5 great academies. Although the Northern Spiritual Realm was considered a vast region, it was still a relatively remote place within the endless Great Thousand World. If they truly want to experience the brilliance of the Great Thousand World, they must first pass through the path of the 5 great academies. Thus, the Northern Spiritual City would become the most dazzling and bustling location whenever the Northern Spiritual Academy's entry competition was hosted. Even the 9 territories' territory lords would personally come over. This was because it was an extremely important matter to them. As long as their children are able to stand out and obtain an entry within the competition, their reputation would improve. Moreover, they would enjoy the envious gazes of other people. This comfortable feeling was not something that could be achieved through the daily expansion of their territory. Today, the Northern Spiritual City was undoubtedly in a state of being inflated. The massive city was crowded, and many noisy sounds gathered. The sounds soared through the clouds and could be heard within a radius of 100 miles. The venue for the entry competition was set in the Northern Spiritual City's northwest area's Northern Spiritual Square. It was considered to be the most spacious location within the Northern Spiritual City and could accommodate 100,000 people. However, the spacious venue has already long been occupied by the crowd. Looking at it, the sea of humans filled the venue to the limits. Even the tall buildings near the square were filled with figures. Inside the square, all the students in the Northern Spiritual Academy were gathered there and were all excited. Wasn't the reason why they came to train in the Northern Spiritual Academy the wish of being qualified for this sort of competition one day? Although they weren't good enough to be in the competition right now, they could still take the opportunity to observe it. Moreover, they would be able to assess how powerful the students that were participating in it were. In front of the Northern Spiritual Square, there were also a few rather prominent and special seats. Currently, the seats were all filled with people. Every single one of them had an extraordinarily imposing manner as well as dense spiritual energy. As they glanced around, their might was revealed. It was the 9 territory lords of the Northern Spiritual Realm. Haha, Brother Mu, you came really early. It's said that that little guy, Chen, is also participating in it this time, right? I haven't seen that little guy in a while, but I've heard from Chen that he is very amazing. In front of the seats, sounds of laughter rang out. A few individuals glanced over and noticed a middle-aged man smiling. Everybody immediately recognized him. It was the Tang territory's territory lord, Tang Shan. Mufeng smiled as he cupped his head towards Tang Shan and said, "How could that boy be powerful? He just likes showing off in front of girls." Mufeng had a pretty good relationship with Tang Shan. Although the 2 territories weren't allies, they would often cooperate with each other. That girl, Chen, has only broken through to the spiritual rotation stage a few days ago. I wonder if she will be able to pass this time. Tang Shan was a bit worried. Although Tang Chen was quite gifted, the ones participating in this entry competition were all outstanding individuals among their peers. It was not easy to win. Oh ho ho! I've heard that there is a seeded entry this time. It's the first time that the Northern Spiritual Academy obtains it. It's impossible for Chen to get it, but let's see if that little guy Chen can obtain it. Tang Shan did not say much about this matter, and his tone changed as he laughed. Mufeng smiled, but just when he was about to speak, a mocking voice rang out from nearby. The Liu territory have pre-ordered this seeded entry. We did not plan to let the others obtain it. Mufeng turned around and glanced at the calm Liu Qingtian. He let out a faint laugh and said, "This isn't a queue for business. How could you talk about pre-ordering it? I've said it wrong. Your Mu territory shouldn't even dream of obtaining this seated entry. Liu Qingtian took a fleeting glance at Mu Feng and said, "You shouldn't say too much. Otherwise, wouldn't it be disgraceful for you when you can't retract back those words?" Mu Feng smiled and said, "Then let's see who will be the one that would be disgraced." Liu Qingtian sneered. A cold chill emerged within his eyes. "Just act all you want now. I'll see if you can laugh when Mubai beats your son half to death." The other territory lords nearby did not participate when they noticed the confrontation between Mu Feng and Liu Qingtian. They knew that the Mu territory and the Liu territory were incompatible with each other. Although there were few of them who were accustomed to Liu territory being so overbearing, the Liu territory was still the strongest force within the northern spiritual realm. Unless there is a need to do so, they did not want to offend them. Mu Feng retracted his gaze away from Liu Qingtian's body. It was useless to say anything right now. Although he knew that Liu Mubai was quite amazing, how could his son be an ordinary individual within his generation? Dong! After the bustling sounds lasted for half an hour within the northern spiritual square, a deep bell sound suddenly rang out and echoed throughout the entire city. As the bell sounded, countless gazes fixated itself in the direction of the northern spiritual square. At that location, 4 figures slowly appeared. The person in front was the Northern Spiritual Academy's Principal Xiao. Behind him, Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi were closely following him. Moreover, there was a rather unfamiliar old man amongst them. He seemed to have a lazy appearance and did not pay the slightest attention as he glanced at the 9 territory lords. "Oh ho ho! I would like to thank everybody for coming today. We are considered to be acquaintances, so I will not say any superfluous words to annoy you." Principal Xiao cupped his fists in the direction of the 9 territory lords and smiled. Seeing this, Mu Feng and the others hurriedly cupped their hands to return a salute. Although Principal Xiao kept a low profile within the northern spiritual realm, no force would dare to underestimate him. Not to mention the peerless identity of the neutral Northern Spiritual Academy, there weren't more than 3 individuals who could surpass his strength amongst the 9 territory lords. Of course, I'll introduce the referee of the Northern Spiritual Academy's entry competition this time. He has the final say over all the rules. Principal Xiao cupped his hands towards the seemingly lazy old man nearby. He immediately smiled and said, "Everybody, this is Mr. Hao from the 5 Great Academies. He will be supervising the entry competition this time." "From the 5 Great Academies?" Mu Feng and the others were shocked when they heard this remark. They quickly stood up and cupped their hands towards this old man. Every single individual that came out from the 5 Great Academies was an all-powerful individual. They were not to be underestimated. The old man known as Mr. Hao only directed a nod towards Mu Feng. This attitude was not considered to be polite, yet the 9 territory lords could only chuckle dryly. His background of the 5 Great Academies was enough to overwhelm them. "Let's begin." Mr. Hao nodded at Principal Xiao and said. Hearing this, Principal Xiao also smiled and glanced at the entire venue. Under his dense spiritual energy, his voice resounded in everybody's ears. For the entry competition this time, there are a total of 12 individuals participating, 5 from the East Branch and 7 from the West Branch. There will be 5 ordinary entries and 1 seated entry. The 12 individuals will split up into 6 matches and fight with each other. The winner will be able to obtain the qualifications of the ordinary entry. Of course, if anyone would like to obtain the seated entry, they can challenge once again. The final winner will be able to obtain this seated entry. Principal Xiao's gaze looked towards the students from the East and West branches and he said, "Is there any problems?" "No." "That's good. The students that are participating in the competition should come up onto the venue." Just as Principal Xiao's voice faded away, a commotion rang out from the East and West branch. Under numerous envious gazes, a group of figures surged out and landed on the venue. "Brother Mu, good luck. Go seize that seated entry." From the East branch, Su Ling, Tan Qingshan, and the others shouted out while being excited. Mu Chen directed a smile at them as he waved. "Seated entry? I'm afraid you don't have the right to get it." At the opposite side, Liu Mubai tilted his head slightly and stared coldly at Mu Chen as he gently spoke. "Won't we know if I have the right to obtain it later on?" Mu Chen smiled and replied, "You think you have the right to fight against Brother Liu?" Beside Liu Mubai, a boy sneered and spoke. He was the one who had a conflict with Mu Chen during the Northern Spiritual Field, Tong. However, the current him seemed to have broken through to the spiritual rotation stage after Teacher Shi's training. This made his confidence soar, and he did not have the fear that he initially had when facing Mu Chen. Mu Chen only glanced at Chen Tong and ignored him. A person who had just advanced to the spiritual rotation stage wasn't someone worthy of his attention. And when Chen Tong noticed that Mu Chen had directly ignored him, he gritted his teeth in hatred. He thought that he must punish him if he meets him later on. For this entry competition, we will follow the old rules. We will decide the opponents through lots. Principal Xiao waved his hand, and the person holding the bamboo lots ran up. Mu Chen and the others extended their hands, and each of them picked a bamboo lot from him. When they noticed that they were drawing lots, the numerous gazes fixated over at that location. The fierce entry competition was about to begin. Mu Chen stared at the lot within his hands. A number was written on the lot. Then he lifted up the bamboo lot. The others, seeing this, also raised the bamboo lot that they just drew. How interesting. I was only thinking about it earlier. Chen Tong smiled hypocritically as he stared at Mu Chen. Then he arrogantly lifted up the bamboo lot within his hand. It was the same number as Mu Chen. Apparently, he was Mu Chen's opponent. Mu Chen stared at Chen Tong, who was arrogantly smiling, and shook his head helplessly. That idiot! Chen Fan and the others grinned. They felt pitiful as they directed a smile towards Mu Chen. The two of them weren't even opponents for Mu Chen right now. Moreover, Chen Tong was probably even weaker than them by a bit. They really didn't know how foolish this person was. How could he still reveal this sort of smile at this moment? It's over. Besides them, Mo Ling's face turned pale, and he smiled bitterly. He raised the bamboo lot within his hand and said, "My opponent is Lu Mubai." Ah? Chen Fan, Tang Chenair, and the others all looked sympathetically at Mo Ling. Amongst the 12 participants of the entry competition, there was no doubt that Mu Chen and Liu Mubai were the hardest to defeat. Since Mo Ling had to fight against Liu Mubai immediately, he was indeed quite unlucky. It's fine. For this entry competition, the outcome is related to the entry. However, it doesn't mean that you're completely out of luck if you lose. Mu Chen patted Mo Ling's shoulders, yet his eyes glanced at the platform towards Mr. Hao, who was from the 5 great academies. He said, "Your current strength has already reached the requirements for the 5 great academies. Therefore, even if you lose, it's possible for you to get an extra chance if you are able to prove how different you are from the others." Really? Mo Ling hesitated for a moment before quickly asking. Mu Chen nodded his head and said, "Of course, but as for how you will impress him will depend on yourself." Mo Ling nodded his head gratefully. The entry was equally important to him. If he failed this time, he would no longer be allowed to enter the 5 great academies. It was his final chance. Dong! A bell sound rang once again within the northern spiritual square. Chen Fan, Tang Qianer, and the others looked at the bamboo lots they drew and slowly backed off. Right now, this first match should be Mu Chen against Chen Tong. As they moved away, numerous gazes instantly gathered at the 2 figures within the stage. Oh ho ho! I never imagined that Mu Chen would be in the first match. Tang Shan looked at the 2 individuals on the stage and said as he smiled. Mu Feng also smiled and nodded his head. Naturally, he could tell that Mu Chen was at the spiritual rotation stage initial phase. Although his opponent was the same level as him, Mu Chen should still be able to defeat such an opponent. Moreover, if Mu Chen were to win this match, he would at least obtain the entry to the 5 great academies. So he's that Mu Chen? On the main platform, Mr. Hao, who seemed to be lazy, suddenly straightened up his body. He looked peculiarly at the handsome boy at the stage. Beside him, Principal Xiao smiled and nodded his head. He looks like a gentle and peaceful boy. I never thought that he would actually do all those things. You really can't judge a person through his appearance. Mr. Hao stared in interest at Mu Chen and muttered these words. I hope that this little guy will not disappoint me. Otherwise, I came here for no reason. At the side, Principal Xiao was quite curious when he heard these words. However, he did not ask about it. He could only try to figure out within his heart just what sort of shocking thing Mu Chen had done in the spiritual road that made the 5 great academies concerned about him. I've said that sometimes people would be unlucky. It really is unreasonable. On the much-anticipated stage, Chen Tong smiled as he looked at Mu Chen. He was still thinking about punishing this guy earlier. Who would have imagined that the opportunity to do so would appear in the next instant? Mu Chen stared helplessly at the arrogant Chen Tong. He could not help but shake his head. This guy is quite foolish. Can you stop talking? Mu Chen sighed and said. Seeing Mu Chen's disregarding attitude, Chen Tong gnashed his teeth. This guy always had an appearance that angers others. Mu Chen, this time I won't let you act this arrogant, Chen Tong shouted out. Dense spiritual energy surged out from within his body. The extent of this power made many Northern Spiritual Academy students secretly click their tongues. As expected, this person had advanced to the spiritual rotation stage. Swish! His toes touched the ground and his body moved swiftly. Spiritual energy erupted out from both palms, and a faint burning fluctuation emitted out. Fiery heartbreak palm! Chen Tong emerged directly in front of Mu Chen. A fiery energy gathered at the center of his palm. It was like a mass of extremely hot flames. Then it carried violent winds as it shot off in anger towards Mu Chen's chest. Mu Chen glanced at him casually and raised his hand. Smack! A crisp sound suddenly resounded out from the stage. The palm that Chen Tong had fired off suddenly froze in midair. He was stunned as he stared at the boy, who directly a helpless smile in front of him. He immediately felt a burning sensation coming from his face. He was suddenly slapped mysteriously. This... Surprised voices also broke out from outside the stage. Many people did not even see what had exactly happened. They could only see a handprint emerging on Chen Tong's face and hear the crisp sound of a slap. What a fast speed! Only the ones with extraordinary eyesight muttered to themselves with a serious expression. They could vaguely see the lightning speed attack during that instant. I'll kill you! Although he did not understand what had happened, the pain from his face made Chen Tong's eyes turn red. He looked ferociously at Mu Chen, and the spiritual energy within his body was released unreservedly. The palm winds were like fire sweeping through the place as it bombarded towards Mu Chen. However, Mu Chen only moved slowly against this fierce offensive. It was like a stroll, and he allowed Chen Tong to attack him crazily, yet it did not even touch his clothes. The scene on the stage looked quite funny. One of them was crazily attacking, while the other was walking around relaxed. It was like a boat following and rising with the waves within a storm. At this moment, even the ordinary individuals could see the difference between the two of them. It seems that the two individuals were not at the same level. What a mysterious movement ability. That Mu Chen isn't simple at all. A few powerful individuals nodded in surprise. He could actually act so relaxed during a spiritual rotation stage's berserk attacks. This wasn't something that anybody could do. Liu Mubai watched the scene coldly. He was quite surprised about Mu Chen's speed. However, he immediately grinned. It would only be interesting if it's like this. Otherwise, wouldn't he feel bored about it? Do you only know how to dodge? Seeing that his attacks were to no avail after a long period of time, Chen Tong immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. It was too hard to bear when every attack of his missed. Mu Chen finally stopped moving. His black eyes stared undisturbedly at Chen Tong. Pyroblast Spirit Fist. Seeing that Mu Chen had stopped moving, Chen Tong's eyes were filled with delight. He immediately took a step forward, and his spiritual energy rushed out endlessly from within his body. Layers of flame accumulated on his fist as it fiercely blasted off towards Mu Chen. Since there was an opportunity, he must use all his strength in this attack to defeat this person. This thought flashed through Chen Tong's mind. Then he noticed Mu Chen also clenching his fists in front of him. Then his arm fired off directly like a spear. Boom! Wrapped by a dark black spiritual energy, Mu Chen's fist collided with Chen Tong's all-out attack without the slightest signs of dodging. A deep sound suddenly resounded through the sky. With the two individuals as the center, a violent blast of air spread out. Mu Chen's body remained motionless, but Chen Tong's face turned red. In the next instant, his body trembled and flew backwards under many astonished gazes. He brushed against the ground for a dozen meters before finally stopping. How is that possible? Chen Tong lifted his head. His face was filled with an incredulous expression. Both Mu Chen and he were at the spiritual rotation stage initial phase. Why is it that he couldn't even block one attack from Mu Chen? I won't believe it! Chen Tong's eyes turned red. With a low cry, he fiercely attacked again. Just when he was about to charge out, a ghost-like black figure appeared in front of him. Before he could even react, a cold hand was pressed onto his throat. Feeling the cold hand on his throat, Chen Tong was suddenly shocked and froze. He stared at the boy's face that was close to him. The originally gentle face had become cold and heartless. Those indifferent eyes made his heart jump, and he could feel that he was being stared by a cheetah. I surrender. Chen Tong swallowed his saliva and said while quivering. He finally understood the difference between the two of them. Although he had advanced into the spiritual rotation stage, he wasn't Mu Chen's opponent at all. Mu Chen glanced at him. He did not seem to care about him and slowly released his hand. "Brother Mu is amazing!" As Mu Chen released his hand, a commotion instantly burst out from outside the stage. The East Branch students, especially Su Ling, Tan Qingshan, and the others could not help but excitedly shout out. They weren't able to see the battle clearly, yet they could tell that the arrogant Chen Tong was completely overwhelmed by Mu Chen. Hearing their cheers, Mu Chen directed a smile towards them. Then, he suddenly felt something and turned his head around. His line of sight landed at the direction of Liu Mubai. At this moment, Liu Mubai had crossed his arms and was staring at Mu Chen like he was something interesting. That appearance was just like a wolf that had found a prey. Liu Mubai noticed Mu Chen looking over and smiled. Then his lips moved slightly. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed. He could tell what Liu Mubai wanted to say to him. "You will end up as pitiful as him." Mu Chen replied back with a smile as his eyes turned cold. "I'll be waiting for it." That wraps up the content for today's episode. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to get notifications for the next episode. For now, goodbye, and see you next time.